The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, was a time when marriage carried meanings far beyond the romantic notions we hold today. In this era, when most of Europe was divided into countless kingdoms, duchies, and feudal territories, marriage served as the fundamental building block of society, economics, and politics. Picture yourself settling into a comfortable space as we explore this fascinating world together, letting the gentle rhythms of history wash over you like a warm, peaceful tide. In medieval times, marriage was primarily viewed as a strategic alliance, a way to secure property, forge political connections, and ensure the continuation of family bloodlines. The concept of marrying for love, while not entirely unknown, was considered a luxury that few could afford. Most marriages were arranged by families, often when the bride and groom were still children, though the actual ceremony typically waited until they reached their teenage years. This practical approach to marriage created a social structure that prioritized stability and economic security over personal desires. The medieval understanding of marriage was deeply intertwined with religious beliefs. The Catholic Church held enormous influence over daily life, and marriage was considered one of the 7 sacraments. According to church doctrine, marriage was a holy union blessed by God, meant to be indissoluble until death. This religious framework provided both the spiritual foundation and the legal structure for medieval marriages. The Church taught that marriage had 3 primary purposes: the procreation of children, the mutual comfort and support of the spouses, and the prevention of sin through the proper channeling of sexual desires. Social class played a crucial role in determining the nature of medieval marriages. Among the nobility, marriages were elaborate political negotiations that could affect the balance of power across entire regions. A noble wedding might unite 2 powerful families, secure a valuable alliance, or bring together vast territories under unified control. These marriages were planned years in advance, with detailed contracts specifying dowries, inheritance rights, and territorial arrangements. The bride's family typically provided a dowry, which might include land, money, livestock, or valuable goods, while the groom's family offered a dower, ensuring the bride's financial security should she become widowed. For the merchant class, which began to emerge and grow in influence during the later medieval period, marriages often served to consolidate business interests and create commercial partnerships. A successful merchant might arrange his daughter's marriage to the son of another merchant family, combining their trading networks and expanding their economic reach. These unions were still primarily business arrangements, but they often allowed for slightly more personal choice than noble marriages, as merchants valued practical compatibility and shared business sense. Among the peasantry, who made up the vast majority of the medieval population, marriages were simpler affairs but no less important for family survival. Peasant marriages were typically arranged within the local community, often bringing together families who could pool their resources and labor. A peasant bride might bring skills in weaving, brewing, or animal husbandry, while the groom contributed his knowledge of farming, carpentry, or other trades. These marriages were essential for economic survival in a harsh agricultural world where cooperation and shared labor meant the difference between prosperity and starvation. The role of women in medieval marriage was complex and varied significantly by social class and region. Generally speaking, women had fewer legal rights than men and were expected to be obedient to their fathers before marriage and to their husbands afterward. However, this legal subordination didn't necessarily translate to powerlessness in daily life. Many medieval women, particularly among the merchant and artisan classes, played active roles in family businesses and wielded considerable influence within their households. Noble women often managed vast estates while their husbands were away at war or on political business. Medieval marriage customs varied considerably across different regions of Europe. In England, the tradition of banns, public announcements of an intended marriage made on 3 consecutive Sundays or holy days, helped ensure that there were no legal impediments to the union. In France, elaborate courtship rituals developed among the nobility, influenced by the ideals of courtly love that emerged in the 12th century. Germanic traditions emphasized the role of the bride price and the ceremonial exchange of rings and gifts. Italian city-states developed sophisticated marriage contracts that rivaled modern legal documents in their complexity and detail. The timing of medieval marriages was carefully considered, with certain seasons and dates being more favorable than others. Spring and early summer were popular times for weddings, as they coincided with plentiful food supplies and pleasant weather for celebrations. However, the church calendar also played a significant role, with certain periods like Lent and Advent being considered inappropriate for marriages. Many couples chose to marry shortly after harvest time, when families had the resources to host celebrations and the agricultural work was largely complete for the year. The legal aspects of medieval marriage were surprisingly sophisticated, with detailed regulations governing everything from the minimum age of consent to the prohibition of marriages between close relatives. Canon law, the law of the Catholic Church, established that marriage required the free consent of both parties, although in practice, family pressure often made this consent somewhat theoretical. The Church also maintained detailed records of marriages, creating some of the earliest systematic documentation of family relationships and social connections. As we consider these historical realities, imagine yourself as a gentle observer of this distant time, watching from a peaceful vantage point as these ancient customs unfold. The weight of centuries seems to settle around you like a comfortable blanket, connecting you to countless generations who have participated in these timeless rituals of human bonding. Feel your breathing slow and deepen as you contemplate the continuity of human experience across the ages, finding comfort in the knowledge that the desire for companionship and family has remained constant throughout history. The medieval world of marriage was one of practical necessity tempered by genuine human emotion, of rigid social structures softened by individual personalities and relationships. As you settle more deeply into contemplation of this distant era, allow yourself to appreciate both the differences and the similarities between their world and ours, finding peace in the eternal human themes that connect us across the centuries. As dawn breaks over the rolling countryside of 13th-century England, imagine yourself as a quiet traveler approaching a small medieval village on what promises to be a special day. The morning mist clings to the valleys, creating a soft, ethereal atmosphere that seems to muffle all sounds except for the gentle clip-clop of your horse's hooves on the packed earth road. You can smell the crisp autumn air, tinged with wood smoke from cooking fires and the earthy scent of recently harvested fields stretching out on either side of the narrow path. The village ahead appears gradually through the morning haze, a cluster of perhaps 30 wooden houses with thatched roofs, gathered around a central common area and dominated by a small stone church whose bell tower rises modestly above the surrounding buildings. This is Millbrook, a typical English village where today a young couple will be joined in marriage, surrounded by their families and the entire community that has known them since birth. The very air seems to carry a sense of anticipation and celebration, as if the village itself is holding its breath in preparation for the day's festivities. As you draw closer to the village, you begin to notice signs of unusual activity. Smoke rises from more chimneys than would normally be seen at this hour, suggesting that many households have begun their preparations early. Gardens that line the edges of the settlement show evidence of recent harvesting, with families having gathered their finest vegetables and herbs for the wedding feast. You can hear the distant sound of voices calling to one another across yard spaces, a cheerful bustle that speaks of cooperative effort and shared excitement. The road you travel has seen many such mornings over the centuries. Worn smooth by countless feet, hooves, and cart wheels, it represents one of the few connections this village has to the wider world. Most residents rarely travel more than a few miles from their birthplace, making any celebration a significant event that brings together the entire extended community. Today's wedding represents not just the union of two individuals, but the strengthening of bonds that hold this small society together against the uncertainties of medieval life. Approaching the village edge, you pass the first houses, modest structures of timber framing filled with wattle and daub, their thatched roofs recently repaired for winter. Small garden plots beside each dwelling show the careful cultivation that helps each family survive, root vegetables stored in underground cellars, herb gardens providing both seasoning and medicine, and perhaps a few fruit trees whose late apples still hang heavy on the branches. These gardens represent hours of patient labor and generations of accumulated knowledge about coaxing sustenance from the earth. The sounds of the village become more distinct as you enter the outskirts. You can hear the rhythmic thudding of grain being threshed, the gentle lowing of cattle being led to pasture, and the cheerful chatter of children already excited about the day's festivities. Dogs bark occasionally, but their tone is welcoming rather than alarmed, suggesting that while strangers are not common, they are not feared either. This is a community secure in its routines and confident in its ability to extend hospitality to peaceful visitors. In the distance, you can see women hanging fresh laundry on wooden frames and lines, taking advantage of the clear morning to ensure that everything will be clean and presentable for the celebration. Their movements are purposeful and efficient, speaking of long experience in managing household tasks while simultaneously preparing for special occasions. Some carry large wooden buckets toward the village well, the social center where news is exchanged and community decisions are often made through informal conversation. The architecture of the village tells the story of generations of families who have called this place home. Most houses are single-story structures with steep pitched roofs designed to shed rain and snow effectively. Small windows, often covered with oiled cloth or thin-scraped animal hide rather than expensive glass, allow some light while keeping out the worst of the weather. Each dwelling represents years of careful craftsmanship, built to last with materials gathered from the surrounding countryside, oak timbers from nearby forests, clay and straw for the walls, and reed thatch from marshy areas along the stream. The central area of the village opens before you like a stage set for the day's drama. Here stands the church, built of local stone probably 2 centuries ago and lovingly maintained by countless generations of parishioners. Its simple Norman architecture speaks of solid faith and community commitment, with thick walls that have witnessed hundreds of baptisms, marriages, and funeral services. Today, those ancient stones will echo with new vows and celebration, continuing an unbroken chain of human ceremony that stretches back into the mists of time. Near the church, you notice that several families have already begun setting up tables and benches in the common area. These preparations suggest that the wedding feast will be a community affair, with each household contributing according to their means and abilities. Some bring wooden trenchers and cups carved from local wood, others carry clay pots containing carefully prepared foods, and a few fortunate families display precious metal vessels that have been passed down through generations, reserved for the most special occasions. The village blacksmith's forge sends up its familiar column of smoke, but today the rhythmic hammering has a different quality, perhaps because the smith is working on special items for the celebration rather than everyday tools and horseshoes. The sweet scent of wood smoke mingles with the sharper smell of coal and heated metal, creating an atmosphere that speaks of human industry and craftsmanship. This smithy serves not just this village but several surrounding settlements, making the blacksmith an important figure whose presence at today's celebration will add to its significance. As you find a quiet spot to observe from, perhaps near an ancient oak tree that has shaded village gatherings for generations, you feel yourself becoming part of this timeless scene. The gentle activity around you has a rhythm that speaks of deep tradition and community understanding. Everyone seems to know their role in the day's festivities, moving with the confidence that comes from participating in customs that have been refined over generations of practice. The morning light grows stronger, illuminating the village with a golden glow that makes even the humblest dwelling seem touched with special beauty. You can sense the anticipation building as the sun climbs higher, knowing that soon the formal ceremonies will begin and this peaceful morning preparation will give way to the joyful celebration of 2 lives joining together in the ancient tradition of marriage. As the morning sun climbs higher over the village of Millbrook, the tempo of activity gradually increases, yet maintains the unhurried rhythm that characterizes medieval life. From your peaceful observation point beneath the ancient oak, you watch as families emerge from their homes dressed in their finest clothing, fabrics that have been carefully stored and perhaps worn only a handful of times for the most important occasions. The sight of the entire community preparing together creates a sense of anticipation that seems to hum gently through the air like a distant melody. The bride's family home, a slightly larger dwelling near the center of the village, has become the focus of considerable attention. You can see women moving in and out, carrying bundles of herbs, flowers, and linens. These are the bride's female relatives and closest friends, tasked with the intimate preparations that will transform young Margaret from maiden to wife. Their movements are purposeful yet unhurried, speaking of rituals that have been performed countless times before, each gesture carrying the weight of tradition passed down from mother to daughter through generations. Inside that bustling household, though you cannot see directly, you can imagine the careful ritual of the bride's preparation. Margaret sits quietly as her mother and aunts brush her long hair with a wooden comb, perhaps one that has been used for similar occasions by generations of brides in her family. Her hair, normally braided and covered in the manner of unmarried women, flows freely today as a symbol of her maidenhood, to be covered after the ceremony as a sign of her new married status. The women around her speak in soft voices, offering advice, sharing memories of their own wedding days, and creating an atmosphere of gentle support and wisdom. The gown Margaret will wear has been carefully prepared over many weeks. In a family of modest means, this might be her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit and refreshed with new trim or decorative elements. The fabric, likely wool dyed a soft blue or green with natural dyes made from local plants, represents a significant investment for the family. Blue was particularly favored for medieval brides, as it symbolized purity and faithfulness, while green represented new life and fertility. The careful stitching and simple embroidery reflect hours of painstaking work, often done by candlelight during the long winter evenings leading up to this day. Meanwhile, at another dwelling across the village, the groom Thomas undergoes his own preparations, though these are considerably simpler than those surrounding his bride. His male relatives and friends gather around him in the manner of men throughout history, offering advice, jest, and companionship as he prepares to take on the responsibilities of married life. Someone has probably lent him a fine tunic for the occasion, perhaps dyed brown or russet with vegetable dyes, and his best hose have been carefully cleaned and mended. His hair has been trimmed and his beard, if he wears one, has been carefully groomed. The village priest, Father Benedict, has been preparing for this day as well. In the small rectory beside the church, he has laid out his finest vestments and reviewed the marriage service that he has performed dozens of times throughout his years serving this community. His role extends far beyond the religious ceremony itself. He serves as counselor, record keeper, and spiritual guide for his parishioners. Today he will not only join two lives in holy matrimony but also create the official record of their union in the church's carefully maintained books. Throughout the village, individual families make their own preparations for the day's celebration. In one household, you might see an elderly woman carefully removing precious metal cups from their storage place, polishing them with soft cloth until they gleam in the morning light. These vessels, perhaps inherited from her own grandmother, will grace the high table where the bride and groom will sit during the feast. Another family prepares their contribution to the celebration, fresh bread baked in loaves shaped like braided wheat, symbolizing abundance and fertility for the new couple. The village children, too young to understand the solemnity of the occasion but old enough to sense the excitement, run between the houses in small groups, their laughter adding a note of pure joy to the morning's activities. They wear their cleanest clothes and have been scrubbed until their faces shine, some sporting flowers or ribbons in their hair. These children will play important roles in the day's festivities, scattering flower petals and herbs along the bride's path to the church, their innocent presence symbolizing the hope for future generations that every marriage represents. As the preparations continue, the scents of cooking begin to fill the air. In household kitchens and outdoor cooking areas, women tend to large pots containing the feast foods that will celebrate the new union. You might smell the rich aroma of a pottage made with barley, vegetables, and perhaps a precious bit of meat saved for this special occasion. Fresh bread bakes in outdoor ovens, filling the air with the yeasty scent that speaks of hospitality and abundance. Herbs gathered from kitchen gardens add their fragrances to the cooking, thyme for courage, rosemary for remembrance, and sage for wisdom. The village musicians, likely consisting of a few local men who can play simple instruments, tune their pipes and drums in preparation for the processional music that will accompany the bride to the church. Medieval wedding music was generally simple and joyful, designed to celebrate rather than to impress with technical virtuosity. The melodies they will play today have been passed down orally through generations, songs that have accompanied countless couples to the altar and created the soundtrack for celebration in this community. As morning progresses toward midday, you notice that visitors from neighboring villages have begun to arrive. These might be distant relatives, trading partners, or simply friends who have traveled the few miles from their own settlements to participate in the celebration. Their presence adds to the festive atmosphere and demonstrates the way medieval communities maintained connections across geographical boundaries through participation in each other's important life events. Each arrival brings news from the wider world and strengthens the social networks that help these small communities survive and thrive. The preparations you observe speak to the deep importance of marriage in medieval society. This is not simply a private matter between two individuals, but a community event that affects everyone in the village. The union of Margaret and Thomas will create new family alliances, potentially bring new skills and resources to the community, and hopefully produce the next generation of children who will carry on the village's traditions and ensure its survival. Every detail of the preparation reflects this communal investment in the success and happiness of the new couple. As you continue to watch from your peaceful vantage point, you feel yourself drawn into the gentle rhythm of these ancient preparations. The unhurried pace, the careful attention to traditional details, and the obvious affection and support surrounding the young couple create an atmosphere of profound contentment. There is something deeply satisfying about witnessing these timeless rituals, finding in them a connection to the fundamental human experiences that transcend the boundaries of time and place. As the village of Millbrook settles into the quiet anticipation that precedes great ceremonies, you find yourself drawn toward the small stone church that serves as the spiritual heart of this community. The ancient building seems to emanate a sense of peaceful solemnity, its weathered walls having witnessed countless celebrations, sorrows, and sacred moments throughout the generations. The morning light filters through the single rose window above the altar, casting gentle patterns of colored light across the stone floor and creating an atmosphere that invites quiet contemplation and reflection. The church itself tells the story of faith maintained across centuries. Built during the Norman period, probably in the late 11th or early 12th century, its thick stone walls speak of permanence and stability in a world where so much else was temporary and fragile. The builders used local limestone, quarried from nearby hills and shaped by skilled masons who understood that they were creating something meant to endure long after their own lives had ended. The simple but elegant arches that support the roof demonstrate the mathematical precision and artistic sensibility that characterized medieval church construction. Inside this sacred space, the atmosphere invites deep breathing and peaceful reflection. The air carries the faint scent of beeswax candles, incense from countless services, and the indefinable aroma of age and sanctity that seems to permeate all truly ancient buildings. Wooden pews, worn smooth by generations of worshippers, line the nave in orderly rows, each bearing the subtle impressions left by countless hands and bodies seeking comfort and spiritual guidance. The very silence seems thick with prayer and reverence accumulated over centuries of use. The altar area, raised slightly above the nave, draws the eye and the spirit upward toward the divine. Here stands a simple wooden altar table, covered with fine linen that has been carefully embroidered by the women of the parish with symbols of faith and hope. Golden candlesticks, probably the most valuable possessions of this modest church, hold tall beeswax candles that will illuminate the marriage ceremony. Behind the altar, a wooden crucifix carved by a local artisan generations ago presides over all the church's activities with gentle authority. The walls of the church bear witness to the artistic devotion of medieval Christians. Simple frescoes, painted directly onto the stone walls, depict scenes from the Bible in styles that emphasize spiritual meaning rather than artistic sophistication. These paintings, created by traveling artists or talented local craftsmen, served to educate a largely illiterate population about the stories and teachings of their faith. The colors, made from natural pigments mixed with local materials, have faded over the centuries to soft, muted tones that create an atmosphere of peaceful reverence. In the moments before the wedding ceremony begins, this sacred space becomes a sanctuary for quiet reflection on the nature of marriage itself. From your contemplative position within this ancient building, you can sense the weight of tradition and the continuity of human experience that connects this day's celebration to countless others that have taken place within these walls. Marriage, as understood by medieval Christians, was not merely a social contract but a sacred covenant that reflected the mystical union between Christ and His Church. The theological understanding of marriage in medieval times emphasized its sacramental nature. Unlike modern ceremonies that often focus primarily on romantic love and personal fulfillment, medieval marriage services emphasized the spiritual dimensions of the union. The couple was understood to be entering into a sacred partnership that had been ordained by God as part of the natural order of creation. This perspective gave marriage a dignity and significance that extended far beyond personal happiness to encompass divine purpose and cosmic meaning. As you sit in contemplation within this sacred space, you might reflect on the three traditional purposes of marriage as understood by medieval theologians. The first was the procreation and education of children, ensuring the continuation of both family lines and the Christian community. This was considered not just a personal desire but a sacred duty that contributed to God's plan for humanity. The second purpose was mutual comfort and support between the spouses, recognizing that human beings were created to need companionship and that marriage provided the proper framework for meeting those needs. The third purpose was the prevention of sin through the proper channeling of sexual desires within the bonds of committed relationship. The church building itself seemed designed to encourage such contemplation. The high ceiling, supported by elegant stone arches, drew the mind upward toward thoughts of eternity and divine purpose. The relative darkness of the interior, broken only by shafts of colored light from the windows, created an atmosphere that seemed removed from the ordinary concerns of daily life. Here, surrounded by the accumulated prayers and devotions of generations, it became natural to consider the deeper meanings of the ceremony about to take place. In the stillness before the ceremony begins, you can almost feel the presence of all the couples who have stood before this altar throughout the centuries. Nobility and peasants, merchants and craftsmen, young lovers and practical partners arranged by families, all have spoken the same vows and received the same blessings within these walls. Their hopes, fears, joys, and sorrows seem to echo gently in the silence, creating a sense of connection to the great continuum of human experience that transcends individual lives and circumstances. The preparations visible around the altar speak to the care with which this community approaches the sacred ceremony. Fresh flowers, probably the last of the season's roses and certainly gathered with great effort, decorate the altar area. Candles have been trimmed and positioned to provide proper illumination for the service. The parish's finest linens have been brought out and carefully arranged. Every detail reflects the understanding that this ceremony deserves the very best the community can offer. As the time for the ceremony approaches, you can hear the gradual gathering of the community outside the church doors. Voices speak in hushed, respectful tones, and footsteps move with the careful deliberation appropriate to sacred occasions. The sense of anticipation builds slowly, like a gentle tide rising against a peaceful shore. Soon these ancient walls will ring with the words of blessing and commitment that will transform two individual lives into a united partnership, continuing a tradition that stretches back to the very foundations of Christian civilization. In this moment of quiet anticipation, surrounded by the accumulated faith and devotion of centuries, you feel a deep sense of peace and connection to something larger than yourself. The ancient rhythms of human ceremony, the enduring power of sacred tradition, and the timeless hope represented by every marriage create an atmosphere of profound tranquility that seems to slow time itself and invite you into an ever deeper state of contemplative rest. The gentle tolling of the church bell signals that the moment has arrived for the sacred ceremony to begin. As you sit in peaceful contemplation within the ancient stone walls, you can hear the congregation gathering in the pews behind you, their whispered conversations creating a soft murmur that speaks of anticipation and joy. The sound of their settling, the rustle of woolen garments, the quiet shuffling of feet, the gentle creak of wooden pews, blends into a symphony of community participation that has accompanied such moments for countless generations. Father Benedict emerges from the small vestry, wearing his finest ceremonial robes for this sacred occasion. His movements are deliberate and reverent, reflecting both the solemnity of the sacrament he is about to perform and the deep familiarity that comes from years of service to this community. The white linen alb beneath his chasuble symbolizes the purity required for sacred service, while the embroidered vestments, probably crafted by the women of the parish over many months, represent the community's offering of their finest work in honor of this holy moment. The processional begins with the gentle sound of a wooden flute, played by one of the village men who has inherited both the instrument and the melodies from his father. The simple, haunting tune echoes off the stone walls, creating an atmosphere of sacred anticipation that seems to lift the hearts of all present toward thoughts of divine blessing and eternal significance. This music, passed down through oral tradition, carries within its notes the hopes and prayers of countless generations who have celebrated the sacrament of marriage within these walls. Young Thomas enters first, accompanied by his father and closest male relatives. His movements show the natural nervousness of any bridegroom, but also the quiet dignity that comes from knowing he is participating in something far greater than himself. His simple but clean garments speak of careful preparation and deep respect for the occasion. As he approaches the altar, you can see in his bearing the weight of responsibility he is accepting, not just to his bride, but to his family, his community, and his faith. The congregation rises as Margaret appears at the church door, and even from your position within the sanctuary, you can sense the collective intake of breath that greets her appearance. She moves slowly down the narrow aisle, accompanied by her parents and female relatives, her steps measured and deliberate in the manner of someone who understands the profound significance of this moment. Her dress, simple but beautiful in its careful construction and modest decoration, flows around her as she walks, creating an image of grace and dignity that seems to embody the highest ideals of medieval womanhood. The ceremony itself follows patterns that have been refined over centuries of Christian practice. Father Benedict begins with the traditional greeting and invocation, his voice carrying clearly through the stone space as he calls upon the blessing of God for this sacred union. His words, spoken in Latin interspersed with the local vernacular, connect this moment to the universal church while remaining accessible to the gathered community. The ancient phrases carry weight and authority that comes from their long use in similar ceremonies throughout the Christian world. The exchange of vows follows the traditional medieval pattern, emphasizing not romantic emotion but sacred commitment and mutual responsibility. Thomas and Margaret speak their promises in clear, steady voices, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other in all circumstances of life. Their words acknowledge that marriage is not simply a personal choice but a sacred covenant that binds them not only to each other but to God and to their community. The simplicity of their vows reflects the medieval understanding that marriage is fundamentally about commitment and service rather than personal fulfillment. The blessing of the rings provides a moment of particular beauty and symbolism. These simple bands of metal, probably crafted by the village blacksmith specifically for this occasion, represent the unending circle of love and commitment that the couple is entering. As Father Benedict blesses the rings with holy water and speaks the ancient prayers over them, the metal seems to glow in the candlelight, transformed from mere objects into sacred symbols of the covenant being established. The exchange of rings, performed with gentle reverence, creates a tangible sign of the invisible bond being forged between two souls. The central moment of the ceremony arrives with the pronouncement of the couple as husband and wife. Father Benedict's voice rings with authority as he speaks the words that transform their relationship from courtship to marriage, invoking the power of God and the authority of the Church to create this new family unit. The congregation responds with quiet amens and gentle smiles, their participation serving as witness to the sacred event and pledge of community support for the new couple. The celebration of the nuptial mass follows, with its ancient rhythms of prayer, scripture reading, and communion. The familiar Latin phrases wash over the gathered community like a gentle tide, connecting this local celebration to the universal church and to all the faithful throughout the world who are sharing in similar worship at this very moment. The incense rises in sweet-scented clouds, carrying with it the prayers and hopes of all present for the happiness and prosperity of the newly married couple. During the quieter moments of the service, as the priest moves through the ancient rituals of consecration and blessing, you find yourself drawn into an ever deeper state of contemplation. The flickering candlelight creates dancing shadows on the stone walls, while the colored light from the windows shifts and changes as clouds move across the sun outside. This interplay of light and shadow seems to speak of the mysteries of faith and the way divine grace works through earthly ceremonies to create something sacred and enduring. The music of the service, the simple chanted responses, the gentle drone of voices joined in prayer, the occasional note of the wooden flute, creates a soundscape that seems to exist outside of time. These melodies, refined through centuries of use, have the power to lift the spirit beyond the concerns of daily life and into communion with something eternal and unchanging. As you listen, you feel your breathing slow and deepen, your mind settling into a state of peaceful receptivity that allows the full beauty and meaning of the ceremony to penetrate your consciousness. The liturgical elements of the service, the carefully preserved texts, the prescribed movements, the sacred vessels and vestments, all work together to create an experience that transcends the individual personalities involved and connects the participants to the vast tradition of Christian worship. This is not simply a personal celebration but a moment when the eternal enters time, when divine blessing touches earthly lives, and when the sacred and the ordinary meet in perfect harmony. As the ceremony progresses toward its conclusion, you can sense the deep satisfaction and joy of the community as they witness the successful completion of these ancient rites. The marriage of Margaret and Thomas represents not just personal happiness but the strengthening of the social fabric that holds their world together. In their union, the past connects to the future, tradition finds new expression, and hope takes concrete form in the promise of continued life and love. As the formal ceremony reaches its sacred culmination, a profound sense of mystery seems to settle over the ancient church like a gentle, luminous mist. The moment when two become one in the eyes of God and community creates a space that feels somehow outside ordinary time, where the earthly and divine realms touch and interpenetrate in ways that invite the deepest contemplation. From your peaceful position within this sacred space, you can sense the congregation settling into a shared reverence that speaks to the mystical dimensions of what they have just witnessed. The newly married couple kneels before the altar for the final blessing, their figures illuminated by the soft glow of beeswax candles and the colored light filtering through ancient glass. In this moment, Margaret and Thomas represent something far greater than their individual selves. They embody the eternal human quest for connection, love, and continuity that transcends the boundaries of any single lifetime. Their joined hands, resting gently on the altar rail, seem to channel centuries of similar unions, creating a visible link in the great chain of human relationship that stretches from the beginning of time into an infinite future. Father Benedict's voice takes on a different quality as he speaks the final blessing over the couple, his words seeming to carry the accumulated wisdom and authority of all the priests who have served this community throughout the centuries. The Latin phrases he intones have been spoken over countless couples, yet each repetition seems to carry fresh power and meaning, as if the ancient words themselves contain some essential mystery that reveals itself anew in each sacred moment. The congregation responds with whispered amens that seem to arise from depths of faith and tradition deeper than conscious thought. The mystical understanding of marriage in medieval Christianity viewed the union of husband and wife as a reflection of the ultimate mystery of divine love. Just as Christ was understood to be mystically united with his church, so earthly marriage provided a glimpse into the nature of perfect love and complete communion between souls. This theological perspective transformed every wedding ceremony into a moment of revelation, where human love became a window into divine reality and earthly commitment reflected eternal truth. As you sit in contemplation of this profound mystery, the very stones of the church seem to pulse gently with accumulated prayer and devotion. Each stone was placed with reverence by medieval builders who understood that they were creating not just a functional building but a sacred space where heaven and earth could meet. The careful proportions of the architecture, the orientation toward the east where Christ was believed to dwell in glory, and the symbolic significance of every decorative element all work together to create an environment that naturally lifts the spirit toward contemplation of ultimate realities. The interplay of light and shadow within the church creates patterns that seem to shift and change with mystical significance. Sunlight filtering through the rose window casts rainbow patterns across the stone floor, while the steady glow of candles creates pools of warm illumination that seem to represent the divine light that illuminates all true love. These visual elements work together to create an atmosphere that speaks to senses beyond the physical, drawing the observer into awareness of spiritual dimensions that ordinarily remain hidden beneath the surface of daily experience. The silence that follows the completion of the ceremony is not empty but full, pregnant with meaning, saturated with significance, vibrating with the presence of something sacred that has just been accomplished. In this silence, you can almost hear the echoes of all the prayers that have been offered within these walls, the tears of joy and sorrow that have been shed here, the hopes and dreams that have been entrusted to this sacred space throughout the centuries. The very air seems thick with blessing and benediction. The medieval understanding of time differed significantly from our modern linear conception. For people of this era, certain moments could become pregnant with eternal significance, creating openings where the divine could enter the temporal realm and transform ordinary reality into something sacred and meaningful. The marriage ceremony represented one such moment, a crack in the fabric of ordinary time through which grace could flow and human lives could be touched by transcendent power. As Margaret and Thomas rise from their kneeling position and turn to face the congregation as husband and wife, their transformation seems visible and palpable. Something fundamental has changed in their relationship to each other, to their community, and to the sacred order of creation itself. They are no longer simply two individuals who have chosen to unite their lives, but participants in a mystery that connects them to the deepest patterns of divine love and creative power that govern the universe. The congregation's response to this transformation is deeply moving in its simplicity and sincerity. These are people who understand that they have been privileged to witness something sacred, and their gentle smiles and whispered blessings speak to a faith that sees divine action in earthly events. Their presence serves not just as witness but as active participation in the mystery being enacted, their prayers and good wishes adding spiritual weight to the sacramental action taking place before them. The musical elements of the service continue to weave their spell of sacred atmosphere. The simple melodies, some probably dating back to the earliest centuries of Christian worship, seem to carry within their ancient intervals and progressions the accumulated prayer of countless generations. As these melodies rise and fall within the stone sanctuary, they create a sonic environment that naturally induces contemplation and opens the heart to receive whatever grace might be offered in this sacred moment. The symbolic richness of medieval Christianity finds full expression in this wedding ceremony. Every element, the white garments symbolizing purity, the rings representing eternity, the joined hands signifying unity, the shared communion cup suggesting complete trust and intimacy, works together to create a multi-layered experience that speaks simultaneously to mind, heart, and soul. This symbolic density allows the ceremony to operate on multiple levels of meaning, offering spiritual nourishment appropriate to each participant's capacity for understanding and reception. As you continue to rest in contemplation within this sacred space, you begin to understand how medieval people could experience such ceremonies as genuine encounters with divine reality. The careful preparation, the accumulated tradition, the community participation, and the sacred setting all work together to create conditions where the ordinary boundaries between sacred and secular, eternal and temporal, divine and human seem to become permeable and transparent. The deep breathing that naturally accompanies such contemplation draws you ever further into the mystical atmosphere of this ancient ceremony. Each breath seems to carry with it something of the sacred incense that has perfumed this space for centuries, while each exhalation releases whatever tensions or distractions might prevent full participation in the mystery being enacted. In this rhythm of breathing and being, you find yourself becoming one with the great congregation of faithful souls who have found peace and meaning within these consecrated walls. As the sacred ceremony concludes and the newly married couple prepares to leave the sanctuary, the atmosphere within the ancient church begins to shift subtly from solemn reverence to joyful celebration. The transformation is gradual and organic, like the way dawn slowly gives way to full daylight, maintaining the sacred quality of the moment while opening space for the community to express their happiness and support for Margaret and Thomas. From your contemplative position within this holy space, you can sense the congregation's spirits lifting, their faces brightening with smiles that speak to the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing something beautiful and meaningful successfully completed. The recessional begins with the same simple flute melody that accompanied the bride's entrance, but now the notes seem lighter, more joyful, carrying within their ancient intervals the promise of new beginnings and hope fulfilled. The wooden instrument's warm tone echoes off the stone walls, creating a musical environment that bridges the sacred and the celebratory, maintaining connection to the divine while acknowledging the very human joy that surrounds every successful marriage. As the melody repeats and develops, other voices begin to join in with gentle humming, creating a spontaneous harmony that speaks to the community's unified response to this happy moment. Margaret and Thomas process down the aisle together now, their joined hands visible to all as a symbol of the union just blessed and sanctified. Their steps are still measured and dignified, but there is a new quality to their movement, a lightness that speaks to relief, joy, and anticipation of the new life they will build together. The congregation watches their passage with expressions of genuine affection and approval, these people who have known both bride and groom since childhood now witnessing their transformation into a new family unit that will contribute to the ongoing life and strength of the community. As the couple reaches the church door, they pause for a moment in the threshold between the sacred interior and the secular world outside. This transitional space seems to shimmer with significance, representing the way their marriage ceremony has equipped them to carry sacred values into their daily life together. The sunlight streaming through the open door illuminates their faces, creating a natural halo effect that speaks to the blessing they have received and the grace they now carry as a married couple. The emergence into the outdoor celebration space creates a moment of pure joy that seems to explode spontaneously from the gathered community. Children who have been waiting outside with barely contained excitement now scatter flower petals and herbs along the couple's path, their laughter ringing clear and bright in the autumn air. The flower petals, roses saved from summer gardens, late-blooming marigolds, and herbs like rosemary and thyme gathered specifically for their symbolic meanings, create a fragrant carpet that seems to transform the ordinary village common into a sacred processional way. The traditional throwing of grain and seeds follows, an ancient custom that predates Christianity but has been incorporated into the marriage celebration as a symbol of fertility and abundance. Handfuls of wheat, barley, and other grains arc through the air like golden rain, falling on the couple and the ground around them as prayers made manifest for prosperity and fruitfulness in their new life together. The sight of these precious seeds being scattered so generously speaks to the community's investment in the couple's future and their confidence that this union will bring blessing not just to the married pair but to the entire village. The feast tables that have been prepared in the common area create a visual symbol of abundance and hospitality that speaks to medieval values of generosity and community support. Long wooden tables, probably assembled by bringing together smaller tables from various households, stretch across the space in configurations that will allow the entire community to share in the celebration. The careful arrangement ensures that the bride and groom will be seated at the position of honor while still remaining integrated with their community rather than separated from it. The foods being brought out for the celebration represent the very best that each household can offer, creating a collective feast that no single family could provide alone. You can see wooden trenchers piled high with fresh bread, clay vessels containing carefully prepared stews and pottages, and precious items like honey cakes and meat dishes that speak to the special nature of this occasion. The sight of so much food gathered together creates an impression of abundance that transforms the reality of the community's modest means through the alchemy of shared celebration. The medieval understanding of celebration emphasized its communal rather than individual nature. This wedding feast belongs not just to Margaret and Thomas but to the entire village, creating an opportunity for the community to express its values, strengthen its bonds, and celebrate its own continuity through the establishment of a new family unit. Every dish contributed, every song sung, and every blessing offered serves to weave the new couple more tightly into the social fabric that will support and sustain their marriage through whatever challenges the future might bring. As the formal seating begins, you can observe the careful attention to social protocol that governs such occasions. The bride and groom take their place at the high table, flanked by their parents and the village's most respected elders. This arrangement reflects not social hierarchy in any oppressive sense but rather the community's understanding of how experience and wisdom can best support and guide young couples embarking on married life. The presence of successful married couples at the place of honor serves as both blessing and example for the new union. The blessing of the feast provides another moment of sacred pause within the celebration. Father Benedict speaks prayers of gratitude over the assembled food, acknowledging it as a gift from divine providence and asking for God's continued blessing on the community that has provided it. This moment of gratitude transforms the simple act of eating into something approaching communion, where sharing food becomes a spiritual as well as physical act that binds the community together in recognition of their mutual dependence on divine grace. The gentle sounds of conversation begin to fill the air as the feast commences, creating a warm acoustic environment that speaks to human contentment and social harmony. These voices represent the full range of ages and experiences within the village, elderly voices sharing memories of their own wedding celebrations, middle-aged voices offering practical advice about married life, and young voices expressing hope and excitement about the future. The interweaving of these different perspectives creates a rich tapestry of community wisdom that surrounds and supports the new couple. As the celebration continues, you notice how the medieval approach to festivity emphasizes sustainability and meaningfulness over excess or display. Every element of the celebration serves multiple purposes, creating joy, strengthening community bonds, honoring tradition, and providing practical support for the new couple. There is no waste or ostentation, but rather a careful attention to making the most of available resources to create maximum beauty, meaning, and happiness. The natural lighting provided by the afternoon sun creates an atmosphere of warmth and blessing that seems to emanate from the celebration itself. The golden light filters through the leaves of surrounding trees, casting dancing patterns across the feast tables and the faces of the celebrants. This interplay of light and shadow creates a visual environment that seems touched with divine approval, as if nature itself is participating in the joy of this human celebration. As you rest in contemplation of this beautiful scene, you can feel your own spirit being lifted by the genuine happiness and community spirit that surrounds you. The sight of so many people united in celebrating something beautiful and good creates a sense of hope and confidence in human nature that seems to settle into your bones and ease whatever tensions or worries might ordinarily occupy your mind. As the afternoon light begins to soften and lengthen across the village of Millbrook, the wedding celebration gradually takes on a different quality, like a beautiful piece of music transitioning from its energetic middle movements toward a peaceful and contemplative conclusion. The feast continues, but the pace becomes more relaxed, the conversations more intimate, and the overall atmosphere begins to settle into the gentle rhythms that will eventually lead this special day toward its natural close. From your position of quiet observation, you can sense the subtle shift in energy as the community begins to savor these precious moments of togetherness, knowing that such perfect celebrations are rare gifts to be treasured rather than rushed. The sun, now lower in the western sky, casts longer shadows across the village common and bathes everything in the warm, golden light that photographers and painters have always prized for its ability to transform even the most ordinary scenes into something touched with magic. This late afternoon illumination seems to soften all the edges of the celebration, creating an atmosphere that feels both timeless and deeply peaceful. The faces of the celebrants glow with warmth and contentment, while the simple wooden tables and benches seem to become part of a pastoral scene that could have been painted by one of the great masters of religious art. The conversations around the feast tables have evolved from the initial excitement and formal speeches into the kind of gentle, meandering discussions that arise naturally when people who care about each other have the luxury of unhurried time together. You can hear elderly voices sharing stories from past generations, their words carrying the accumulated wisdom of lives fully lived and the deep satisfaction that comes from seeing their community's tradition successfully passed on to another generation. These stories, told in the soft tones of people who know their audience well, create a verbal tapestry that weaves the present celebration into the larger narrative of village life. Young mothers tend to children who are beginning to show the first signs of the happy exhaustion that comes from a day of special excitement and celebration. The little ones lean against their parents' shoulders or curl up on benches beside family members, their earlier enthusiasm giving way to the kind of drowsy contentment that speaks to hearts fully satisfied by love and attention. Their peaceful faces reflect the security that comes from being surrounded by an entire community that cares for their well-being and wants to see them thrive and grow in happiness. The newly married couple, Margaret and Thomas, seem to have settled into their new roles with a grace that speaks well for their future together. No longer nervous or uncertain, they move through the celebration with the quiet confidence of people who know they are exactly where they belong, surrounded by love and support, embarking on an adventure that has been blessed by both heaven and earth. Their interactions with their guests show a natural warmth and gratitude that suggests they understand the profound gift they have received in the form of community support and divine blessing. As the celebration continues into the early evening hours, the village musicians begin to play more softly, their melodies taking on the gentle, contemplative quality that naturally accompanies the approach of twilight. The simple instruments, wooden flutes, small drums, and perhaps a stringed instrument or two, create music that seems designed to accompany reflection rather than energetic dancing. These melodies, passed down through generations of village celebrations, have a timeless quality that speaks to the eternal human need for beauty, harmony, and artistic expression. The food service has transitioned from the abundant presentation of the main feast to the more intimate sharing of special treats saved for the end of the celebration. Honey cakes appear on the tables, their sweetness representing hopes for happiness in the couple's future life together. Small cups of precious ale or wine are passed among the adult guests, creating opportunities for quiet toasts and personal expressions of good wishes. These final culinary offerings represent the community's most treasured resources, shared as a way of expressing the depth of their affection and support for the new couple. The medieval understanding of celebration recognized the importance of proper endings, viewing the conclusion of festivities as an opportunity to seal the blessings received and prepare participants to carry the joy and meaning of the event forward into their regular lives. This evening transition serves multiple purposes, allowing emotions to settle into lasting memories, providing time for final expressions of support and good wishes, and creating a natural bridge between the extraordinary experience of the wedding day and the ordinary rhythms of daily life that will resume tomorrow. As darkness begins to gather at the edges of the celebration, torches and lanterns are lit to extend the festivities into the early evening hours. The flickering flames create pools of warm light that seem to draw people together into smaller, more intimate groups. These lighting transitions mark the natural rhythm of pre-electric celebrations, where the availability of light shaped the flow of events and created natural boundaries between different phases of activity. The sight of families beginning to clean up and organize their belongings creates a sense of gentle closure that speaks to the medieval appreciation for order and completion. There is something deeply satisfying about watching people work together to restore their community space, their movements coordinated by years of shared experience and their attitudes reflecting satisfaction with a celebration successfully completed. This collaborative cleanup becomes itself a form of community bonding, a final shared activity that ensures the day ends as it began, with cooperation and mutual support. The evening air carries the mingled sense of the feast, wood smoke from cooking fires, the yeasty aroma of fresh bread, the sweetness of honey cakes, and the herbal fragrances of the plants used for decoration and seasoning. These scents create an olfactory memory that will long outlast the visual impressions of the day, providing a sensory connection to this moment of perfect community celebration that participants will carry with them for years to come. As you continue to observe from your peaceful vantage point, you can feel your own breathing naturally slowing and deepening in response to the evening's contemplative atmosphere. The gentle activity around you creates a sense of profound contentment, as if witnessing this successful celebration has satisfied some deep human need for meaning, beauty, and community connection. The knowledge that such moments of perfect harmony are possible provides a foundation of hope and confidence that seems to settle into your very bones. The conversations around you begin to take on the quality of gentle reminiscence, as people share their favorite moments from the day and express their hopes for Margaret and Thomas's future together. These exchanges create a verbal cocoon of good wishes and positive intentions that seems to wrap around the new couple like a protective blessing. The warmth and sincerity of these expressions speak to the deep bonds that connect this small community and the genuine investment each member has in the happiness and success of their neighbors. As the celebration draws toward its natural conclusion, you sense the approach of that perfect moment when all has been said and done, when satisfaction is complete and the time has come for rest and reflection. This transition feels as natural and inevitable as the setting of the sun, creating a sense of closure that speaks to the eternal rhythms of human experience and the way properly conducted celebrations can create islands of perfect meaning within the flow of ordinary time. As the evening deepens over the village of Millbrook and the wedding celebration draws to its gentle close, a profound sense of completion seems to settle over the entire community like the softest of blankets. The last toasts have been offered, the final blessing spoken, and the cleaning completed with the kind of cooperative efficiency that speaks to years of shared experience in managing communal celebrations. Now, as families begin to drift toward their homes and the newly married couple prepares to begin their life together, you find yourself surrounded by an atmosphere of such deep peace and contentment that it seems to invite the most profound rest and reflection. The transition from celebration to conclusion has unfolded with the natural grace that characterizes all authentic medieval ceremonies. There was no abrupt ending, no artificial climax, but rather a gradual settling into quietude that mirrors the way day gives way to night in the natural world. This organic approach to endings reflects the medieval understanding that all human activities should align themselves with natural rhythms rather than attempting to impose artificial timelines on experiences that need space to unfold according to their own inner logic. As the village settles into its evening routines, you can hear the gentle sounds that mark the end of a successful day, doors closing softly, voices calling quiet goodnights across yard spaces, and the settling sounds of animals being secured for the night. These familiar domestic noises create a soundscape of security and normalcy that seems to promise that while this special day has ended, the ongoing life of the community continues in its eternal patterns of work, rest, celebration, and renewal. The newly married couple has been escorted to their new home, perhaps a small dwelling that Thomas has prepared, or rooms that have been added to his family's house to accommodate the new family unit. This transition represents one of the most significant moments in medieval life, when individuals cease to be primarily defined by their birth families and become responsible for creating their own household. The community's role in this transition extends beyond the wedding ceremony itself to include practical support in establishing the new family's economic and social foundations. From your position of peaceful observation, you can sense the way this single wedding celebration connects to countless similar events that have taken place throughout history. The specific details, the names of the bride and groom, the particular foods served, the individual faces in the congregation, are unique to this time and place, but the underlying patterns represent something eternal and universal about human nature and the way communities support and celebrate the formation of new families. The medieval understanding of marriage as a reflection of divine love gives this day's events a significance that extends far beyond personal happiness or social arrangement. In joining Margaret and Thomas in holy matrimony, the community has participated in something that medieval theologians understood as a visible sign of invisible grace, a sacrament that makes present the love between Christ and His Church. This theological perspective transforms every successful marriage into a window through which divine love becomes visible and accessible to human understanding. As you rest in contemplation of this beautiful day's events, you can feel your consciousness naturally settling into the kind of deep, peaceful state that arises when the mind has been fed with beauty, meaning, and genuine human connection. The satisfaction that comes from witnessing something truly good and beautiful creates a foundation of contentment that seems to penetrate every level of your being, from the most superficial thoughts to the deepest spiritual longings. The sounds of the evening continue to weave their spell of peaceful conclusion. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear the gentle lowing of cattle being settled for the night, the soft whisper of wind through the thatched roofs, and the occasional call of night birds beginning their own ancient rituals. These natural sounds create an acoustic environment that seems designed to encourage rest and reflection, drawing the mind away from the stimulation of celebration and toward the quieter pleasures of contemplation and inner peace. The visual beauty of the village at twilight provides a perfect complement to the gentle sounds of evening settlement. The warm glow of firelight beginning to appear in windows creates a pattern of welcoming illumination that speaks to the security and comfort of home. Smoke rising from chimneys traces graceful patterns against the darkening sky, while the last light of day catches on thatched roofs and stone walls with a tenderness that transforms even the humblest dwellings into something touched with magic. The celebration you have witnessed represents the culmination of weeks or months of preparation, but its effects will ripple outward through time in ways that cannot be measured or calculated. Margaret and Thomas will carry the memory of this day's love and support throughout their married life, drawing strength from the knowledge that their entire community invested in their happiness and success. The children who participated in today's festivities will remember these scenes when they plan their own weddings, ensuring that the traditions you have observed will continue to provide meaning and structure for future generations. As your breathing naturally deepens and slows in response to the evening's peaceful atmosphere, you can feel yourself becoming one with the ancient rhythms that have governed human life since the beginning of time. The cycle of celebration and rest, community gathering and private reflection, joyful activity and peaceful contemplation creates a pattern that seems to speak to something fundamental about human nature and our need for both stimulation and tranquility. The theological significance of what you have witnessed extends beyond the specific religious content of the ceremony to encompass broader questions about the nature of love, commitment, and community support. The medieval approach to marriage recognized that individual happiness, while important, must be balanced with social responsibility and spiritual purpose. This perspective created a framework for understanding marriage that was both deeply personal and profoundly communal, acknowledging that the success of any individual union depends largely on the support and wisdom of the larger community. The gradual transition from the active celebration of the afternoon to the quiet contemplation of evening mirrors the natural progression that leads from conscious activity toward rest and renewal. Just as the day's festivities have provided nourishment for the social and spiritual dimensions of human life, the approaching night offers opportunity for the kind of deep rest that allows those experiences to be properly digested and integrated into lasting memory and understanding. As you settle more deeply into this state of contemplative peace, you can sense the way this single day's events connect to the vast tapestry of human experience that stretches across centuries and continents. Every culture in every era has developed rituals for celebrating the formation of new families, and while the specific forms vary widely, the underlying human needs being addressed remain remarkably constant. Today's celebration in medieval Millbrook represents one beautiful expression of this universal human impulse to mark significant transitions with beauty, meaning, and community support. The profound satisfaction that comes from witnessing authentic human celebration creates a foundation of trust and hope that seems to settle into the deepest levels of consciousness. In a world that often seems fragmented and uncertain, the sight of a community coming together to support and celebrate something beautiful and good provides reassurance that human nature contains within itself the capacity for genuine love, generosity, and wisdom. As the evening deepens toward night and your contemplation deepens toward sleep, you carry with you the images, sounds, and feelings of this perfect day of celebration. The memory of Margaret and Thomas speaking their vows, of the community gathering to offer support and blessing, of the feast shared with generosity and joy, creates a treasury of beautiful experiences that will provide comfort and inspiration for whatever challenges the future might bring. In this gentle transition from wakefulness toward rest, surrounded by the ancient peace of a community that knows how to celebrate love and support new beginnings, you find yourself embraced by the eternal rhythms of human experience. The day has been complete, the celebration successful, and the time has come for the kind of deep, restful sleep that allows the soul to process and integrate all the beauty it has witnessed. In this sacred rest, you become one with all the generations who have found peace in the knowledge that love endures, communities support their members, and life continues its ancient patterns of renewal and hope. As consciousness gently fades into the peaceful darkness of blessed sleep, you carry with you the warmth of human community, the beauty of sacred ceremony, and the profound satisfaction that comes from witnessing something truly good and meaningful successfully completed. In dreams touched with candlelight and flower petals, blessed with ancient music and timeless vows, you rest in the eternal embrace of human love made sacred through community celebration and divine blessing.